Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Job Train How Talent session. And this morning, I've got a pretty major upgrade, a big change of surroundings. I'm back here at Job Train HQ and really happy to be home. Sadly, I'm one of only two people here today. We've been working really hard to make some adjustments in the office so that some of our teams can come together in a socially distanced way to see one another again and exchange ideas. But it might be a little while before we're all back together again. But being back in the office does mean one thing, that I've suddenly got access to some decent broadband at last. So very excited about that and looking forward to cracking on with today's session. So this morning, we are talking about accessibility and inclusion, and specifically about the candidate experience of applying online. Now, for us here at Job Train, delivering an ATS and delivering an online candidate experience, for years we really grappled with making sure that our candidate experience was accessible. But during the course of that, what we discovered that it wasn't necessarily inclusive. We'll come on to explain a little bit more about that in a while, but about 2-3 years ago, we formed a partnership with ReciteMe to help make sure that our candidate experience can be inclusive. And to explain a lot more about that and much else besides, I'm really pleased to be joined by Martin from ReciteMe. And Martin has tons of experience. So if you have any questions at all in this morning's session, please do stick them in the chat stream, or ideally put them in the Ask Me Questions bit down here. And we're going, we've got just half an hour, but lots to cover. So let's get started, and I'll invite Martin on screen. So let's have a look. Let's find you, Martin. Hey, right, inviting Martin on screen now. Right, Martin, are you there? Drum roll, please. Quick swig of coffee. Here he is.
Hello.
Hi, good morning. How are you doing? I'm
good, thanks. I'm glad you can hear me after yesterday's test.
Yeah, that wasn't very successful. This is why we do tests as much as possible. So, hearing you loud and clear. Can everybody hear us both clearly before we get started on this one? Just waiting. Anybody add a chat? There we go. I've got David there. Can everybody hear us all right? Quick thumbs up or something in the chat stream would be great. It's gone very quiet. I'm assuming that no news is good news. There we go. Right. Thank you very much, Sarah. Martin, thank you. Oh, wow. I've got loads now. Brilliant. This, Martin, has proved to be our most popular session yet. So,
wow.
Big billing, no pressure. Would you like to give everybody just a quick introduction to you and also to ReciteMe as well?
Yeah, sure. So, I've worked at ReciteMe for coming up for 4.5 years. I run and manage a sales team of about 10 people. When I started, the sales team was me. So we're very much kind of scale up, I suppose, rather than startup. But what Recite is essentially a software company, and more specifically, we're an accessibility and inclusion software company. And the main product that we have is the self-titled ReciteMe. We provide that to clients in a range of industries. And what the software does is it allows anybody who is visiting your website or using your online platform or an intranet to consume the content in ways that work for them. And what I mean by that is it provides a whole host of options that somebody might need, from being able to have the content read aloud to changing fonts or changing color combinations. And, you know, there's a whole host of reasons for that. So you might have someone with low vision, for example, who would prefer to listen to content or increase the size of everything. You might have someone who's neurodiverse who has a particular color preference, and Recite enables them to do that. And there's some language tools built in as well. So if you have someone who has English as a second language, they can use the language that they prefer. That's probably about as
That's great.
Briefly as I can as I can explain it. It's often easier to just to just see it. So yeah, after this we can share some links if needed, and people can
I think that'd be
see
good.
exactly what Recite does.
Yeah, and not to put you on the spot too much, but perhaps you could even sort of show how it works. But before we get to that point, when I started this conversation, I made reference to accessibility and how at JobTrain we'd worked really hard behind the scenes to try and make sure our candidate experience was accessible.
Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily exclusive. So for everybody inclusive rather. So for the benefit of everybody, can you explain the difference between accessibility online and inclusivity?
Yeah, sure. So I actually wrote something that went onto our website as a blog piece not that long ago on this, because accessibility is the world in which we inhabit, and it's the word that is used a lot, even around Recite and in some of our own marketing materials. But when it comes to websites in particular, or online platforms, when you talk accessibility to anybody who has even some knowledge of accessibility in online spaces, they think of WCAG, which is WCAG, which stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines.
It's quite a mouthful, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And what those guidelines are is a very comprehensive set of guidelines around how you should build anything that is accessed online. And I'm not very techie, so I'll use the non-techie examples.
Please do, yeah.
But it's things like if you're using an image on a website, making sure that every image has alternative text descriptions. It's making sure things like the color combinations that you use are of high enough contrast ratios. So I think 1:4 or something like that is the actual guideline. And then there's a whole host of other guidelines that are a lot more technical around making sure things are labeled correctly and headings are labeled, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of that governs how something is built, so that the easiest example is if a blind user visits your website, can their screen reader understand what it's seeing on that site and then read aloud that content to the screen reader user?
Yeah.
But there's,
in other words, it's
like
a best practice code to make sure that your website can be read by somebody with the appropriate tool in order to give them the experience that they need to understand it.
Yes.
So
yeah.
In other words, it's accessible, but that's
exactly
as far
right.
as it goes. And there's another term called AA compliance that is used quite a lot at all. And what does that mean?
Yes, so the WCAG guidelines have different levels. They have A, AA, and AAA. And yeah, as I say, it gets really complex around how you achieve those compliance levels. Most people will aspire for AA, and that's probably where you should be aiming, is to make sure that your site is compliant to the latest version, which is version 2.1, and then level AA.
Yeah, but even if you achieve that, your site is accessible, but it's not necessarily inclusive, is it?
Yeah, and that's the crux of the piece I wrote recently, which is it's entirely possible for you to build a site that is technically compliant, but is still incredibly difficult to use. And that's where things like Recite come in, because it's about individual choice. We are all individuals. We all have personal preference, regardless of whether we are neurodiverse or have a vision issue or whatever else it might be. I'm colorblind, and I can go onto some sites where the brand guidelines might be that we use black or gray or something in a let's say a footer, and then if you use particular colors for the text in that footer, I'm not going to be able to see it. Now, that color combination might pass a WCAG guideline. It probably wouldn't, but it might. And there's other examples. I was speaking to someone recently whose daughter has Erlen syndrome, which not many people are aware of, but it's a sensory. It affects your tolerance for sensory overload. And that person had a particular preference to read anything with a green background and black text.
Right.
Now, your site can be completely accessible to the guidelines, but that person is still going to struggle to read it, no matter what you've done to it. And so there's all sorts of examples like that. You know, people with dyslexia often have preferences for particular fonts or particular colors. Ross, who founded Recite, because he's dyslexic, his preference is a yellow background. We've got a couple of guys on the sales team who have preferences for things like pale blue, or I was talking to someone recently as well who has ADHD, and their preferences for a grey background. So there's all, you know, everybody's so different. And then also there's the sensory side of things that I touched on. So sensory overload is obviously a thing. You can build a beautiful website, but someone might visit it and think there's too much information there. There's too much for me to take in at once. Maybe you've got, you know, image carousels. They're not particularly accessible to begin with, but maybe you've got them. So things, one of the things that Recite can do, it can allow you to simplify that page. So just to visualize that, if anyone imagines when a website doesn't load properly for you, and you're left with just the links and the content, basically Recite allows you to just do that. So it strips out a lot of the design elements. So yeah, sorry, I've lost track of what the original question was.
You covered the bases really well. I think, you know, in summary, when we are creating, whether it be, if we're going to look at recruitment specifically here, you're creating, you know, really strongly branded careers websites or a candidate experience and that kind of stuff, it's probably nigh on impossible to consider every single individual diverse group and what their own needs might be, and then reflect that in the design. Because ultimately what you end up with is something that consists of very little design at all, because you're trying to accommodate or allow, you know, include everybody in essence. So I guess in terms of, you know, the conversation we're having around Recite, it's, you know, make sure that you have a tool that's there that then allows people to have choice themselves in terms of what their experience is going to be online.
Yeah, and you know, somebody doesn't have to be neurodiverse or have a vision issue. It might just simply be that, oh, I prefer that. It's personal preference. It's there's examples, you know, all throughout history of designs and products that were developed with accessibility at the forefront. So, you know, designed for particular groups that actually make things better for all. And that's simply what we're saying here. Just make it better for all, but you're actually specifically helping the 20% of the population who potentially have a disability. But we'll all have a disability at some point. I have well, I'm diabetic, so I go and have regular eye tests, and the result of that is for about 6 hours I can't really see properly. So being able to increase the size of everything just helps me for those few hours. Now, we'll all be disabled at some point in one way or another, whether you've broken your leg or your vision starts to fail, or we just all get old and things start to not work the way they should.
Yeah, I'm there already. We'll start to enter anyway. I hit the 40s now.
So, you know, there's lots of stats and percentages out there around, you know, people with dyslexia, people who are neurodiverse, people with vision issues, an overall percentage of the population estimated between 15 and 20% who are disabled in some way. But it's transient is the point, and it's just makes something easy for someone to make a decision on what works for them. That's inclusivity when you talk about online for me.
Yeah. In terms of the journey itself for a candidate, typically applying for roles and that kind of thing, are there any specific tips that you might give in order to make that experience a bit more inclusive and more accessible for different groups and things? And are there any particular no-nos that people should be avoiding in terms of an online experience?
Well, I think I've mentioned a couple already. So things like image carousels, designers love them. People with neurodiversity in particular really struggle with them. Honestly, it's it's the basics. Something can be simple and designed beautifully, which is great. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't overload. And yeah, give as much choice as possible. I think one of the conversations I've been interested in over the last few years with the recruiters and D&I specialists that we speak to is one around disclosure. And so you have that balance of wanting to know so that you can help, but respecting the person's
that's a
desire
difficult balance to strike, isn't it?
And so anything you can do online that allows the person to self-serve, whether it's Recite or something else, I think is going to be of benefit, because the person doesn't then have to tell you. Someone can use Recite or something else on your site to make that journey easier without having to tell you, or I'm dyslexic and so I did this, or I'm dyslexic, can you provide this in an audio format, or whatever it might be. And it's just, we all want people to disclose more and I suppose get the message out that we are inclusive places to work, but there's still individuals who will not be comfortable disclosing. I mean, we exist because Ross is dyslexic and he had the idea and then developed the product. We've got people in the business who are dyslexic. We've got people who are neurodiverse in other ways. We've got people who have vision impairments. They've obviously disclosed those things during the course of working for Recite. But I've also got people in my sales team who didn't disclose they were dyslexic until 3 weeks after they started. And if someone isn't comfortable disclosing they're dyslexic to a company that was founded by someone with dyslexia and is aimed at helping people who are dyslexic, then who are they going to be comfortable disclosing to?
Yeah, got a question from Caroline. Have you got any? What's the best example of a compliant careers website that you've seen, so that people can get a bit of inspiration?
So I'm going to be careful with an answer here in that.
Okay.
So this is where we come back to WCAG versus inclusion. So I couldn't tell you what websites are compliant when it comes to WCAG guidelines, because I have no way to test that. You need an expert to do that. There are some automated tools out there that will do that for you. You will still need some human testing on top of that, because the automated tools can only do so much. It's one of the things we're actually developing is a compliance testing tool.
Okay.
So I wouldn't like to answer from a compliance perspective. I can talk about some career sites that include Recite, and I know those organizations take WCAG compliance seriously.
Yeah.
A client of yours is an example, Giles, YBS. So the YBS career site, they have Recite on their career site, and obviously in the ATS through JobTrain as well.
Yeah. I was going to say, to bring that to life, could we have a look at that now? Do a quick screen share. I think we did talk about like sharing screens and stuff yesterday, but I think it'll bring it to life for people to understand, well, you know, looking at a real world career site, and then when you do use a tool like Recite, how that can change the experience for different groups and things.
Sure.
One of the other things we didn't touch on as well was language as well. Mm-hmm. So increasingly now you're going to have people applying for jobs, for whom English isn't a first language. So whether that be on page translation or actually just having an audio translation of the page as well, that's something else that adds to inclusivity in terms of the tool as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you might have people who have English as a second language. They might be absolutely fluent, but they still might prefer to read in their native language. I've heard that quite a few times. So just having the ability to make that adjustment really helps.
Yeah. I'm going to stop talking at you now, and I'm going to let you.
Okay. So if I share my screen, to go here, you should be able to see the Yorkshire Building Society website. Yep,
I can see it fine.
Awesome, cool,
great.
So on this particular example, the launch of Recite is in the top right here. So accessibility tools, and once I launch that, this is what I see. the text to speech isn't going to come through because I've got my headphones in, but you can hover over content and it will read that aloud for you. And then you'll see all sorts of options across the top there. But if, for example, the one I gave earlier, I have a preference for maybe Verdana, I can change the text so that it's in Verdana. I can change to specific dyslexia fonts. I can change the line height and character spacing, which can help with line follow for people with vision impairments, or it can help with crowding that someone with dyslexia might suffer from.
The open dyslexia one was a bit of a revelation for me, because obviously not being dyslexic myself, I didn't realize that actually could make page text much easier to read just by changing the font and actually adding a bit of weight to the bottom of the font as well.
Yeah, I don't like it, but I'm not dyslexic. But again, it's a bit broken record for me, I guess, but it's just that personal choice. So, I've spoken to people with dyslexia who really don't like this font, and I've spoken to others who do. And the ones that do talk about exactly that, the weighting at the bottom of the letters, it helps to anchor each character, and I suppose helps with that interference you might get from other words or letters on the page. The color combinations, there's a selection that are predefined, so you might have some high contrast requirements. I mentioned some kind of like pastel backgrounds earlier, so that might help you. But the whole point of Recite is that everything is personalized and it's down to individual choice. So I can choose something from a color palette that works specifically for me. And there's a few other parts of Recite I can use to change the colors of content on.
And you also mentioned before about actually focusing on specific areas of text. If there's a lot going on the page, I know that there's for example, there's a ruler option as well, which I think is something that's really good in terms of a focus.
Yeah, so this obviously replicates what people might do offline, I guess, but it can help with concentration. It can help for, again, vision impairments or neurodiversity. And the opposite of that is a screen mask, which same sort of assistance, but also can help with any sensory challenges that someone's having. And then I mentioned earlier, just stripping the whole page back. So you're left with just the, sorry, I clicked the link there, apologies, but you'll see Recite follows me through that journey. And I can also then center that content. So there's research out there that talks about dyslexia in particular, actually, but reading and learning challenges and how centering of content can help. I think one of the things I read talked about 70 characters being more or less ideal. But again, everybody's an individual. And when it comes to those languages that you mentioned, Giles, there's a list of options for translation. Anywhere you see the speaker symbol, there's a voice for that language. So I'm going to go Polish because I hear that more than any other. But there's a whole great big list there. And again, you'll have to take my word for it that the text to speech works. But it reads aloud in a local accent. So in this case, Polish. But obviously anybody can go to this site or any other that Recite is on and see how Recite works and have a go at it.
That's brilliant, really useful. Got another question down here. Are there any social media sites, for example, Facebook and Twitter, that are more inclusive or accessible than others, or particularly good examples?
Sorry, let me come back on screen.
Okay.
All of them take web accessibility seriously, and all of them are probably compliant when it comes to how they've built their platforms. The difficulty with all of them is that the content is user generated, so the emphasis on making something accessible becomes the user's issue. So if I give you an easy example, is if you upload an image to LinkedIn, you could and should add alt text
to explain what that image is about and what
yes.
it conveys.
So I'm not sure if that answers the question.
I think what you're saying is that the basis or the premise of the design of most social media sites are that they should be accessible in some way.
I would expect them to be WCAG compliant and building everything they do to those standards. That doesn't necessarily mean it's usable for every individual who might want to use it, but there are things that there's a transfer of liability almost to the user. So if I use LinkedIn or Twitter, it's my responsibility to make sure that image has alt text, as an example.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the challenge is going to be that that candidate experience can start almost anywhere.
Yeah.
and a lot of the time it's going to start on social media sites. It might be on Glassdoor reviews, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But I guess there's only so much that you can control. And it's about making sure that the point at which the candidate lands on your brand or pages that you own and that you control specifically are as inclusive as possible using a tool like, ReciteMe.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. There's all sorts of sites that aren't necessarily inclusive that candidates will work through a job application and apply in the same way that they'll just find workarounds on any website or any social media platform because they've been used to doing that for, well, however old they are, for however many years. People with dyslexia usually diagnosis is possible from around 6 onwards, but lots of people aren't diagnosed until much later. So Ross was 22. So there's workarounds, and there's, visiting a website for Ross, as an example, not having something like Recite on a website doesn't stop Ross from visiting a website and going through the journey of visiting that website if it's something he wants to do. It's more difficult and more time consuming than if he had options to have the content read aloud or read it in yellow background, black text. So there's testing that people with dyslexia often have, and one of the results is often, the color combination that works best for you is this, and it results in efficiencies of X%. So in other words, you can get through that quicker. And I've heard lots of people with dyslexia, including Ross, say that it's not about efficiency. It's not about being quicker. It's about staying with that content longer. I will get through more of it before I give up if it's in a combination that works for me than I would do otherwise. So yeah, people with all sorts of needs they'll still go through your journeys, but I suppose it gives a perception of what you're like as an employer if you're being more inclusive right from the first interaction that someone has with your brand.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and probably more than that, if you want to welcome a diverse group of people to apply for your jobs and go through that candidate experience, rather than expecting them to do the hard work themselves, place the tools that they may need in order to best have almost like an equal approach and an equal process to other people front and center, and that sends a very clear message, but also makes their life so much easier than it might otherwise have been as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to stretch that a little bit, what you're almost saying is we've made reasonable adjustments to the best of our ability on our website, the same as we would to our physical buildings for anybody who's physically disabled.
Brilliant, great advice. Now I can see we've got 2 questions down here, so
okay, I can't see
hot seat now. Okay, question from Gary here. Has any Recite clients reported any surprising or interesting positive results of focusing on supporting accessibility?
Yes, we've got lots of examples of that. I can share some links after this that you can maybe distribute, Giles. But
or if you've got any to hand, you can just stick them in the chat stream as well.
Let me see.
But otherwise, we'll do a blog post after this anyway and send this out, so we can easily share some links out.
The most obvious and kind of HR recruitment one I can think of would be, top of my head, probably Mawson. I'm sure most people would be familiar with Mawson as a recruiter. So that was a piece that they did after a few months of having Recite on their site. We've got some resources on our website, which is some guest blogs. One is from someone with dyspraxia who contacted us after seeing us on a recruitment agency website to tell us how good it was and how much of a difference it made to him in that process. And then a recent public sector client, Sefton Council, I think it was, they did some user group testing before buying Recite, and so there's some comments and some feedback from that user group in that piece on our website, so I can dig that link out as well. Great.
Next question. So do you know from working with previous clients if this is compatible with Workday as an ATS? We've just recently gone live with Workday. Don't worry if not, we will of course look into it.
So the answer I'm going to give is yes. Recite works.
You're
on
allowed
Workday.
To say that. I know we're on competition with Workday, but it's okay, we're all friends.
Let me just double check that I'm not getting confused with Workable, because I do that sometimes.
I mean, I will say overall that the partnership with ReciteMe has been a revelation for us in terms of our approach to delivering candidate experiences that are truly inclusive. And we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we have done without you. I think we've got now probably maybe coming up to about a quarter of our clients that have added the ReciteMe toolbar to JobTrain, and they're getting really good results. And more than that, actually, we get some really insightful reports as well that give a really clear breakdown on who's accessed the website, also across different devices, different browsers, but also which tools have they used as well and got some benefit from. So yeah, it's been a real revelation for us.
Great. So I've just looked at a recent client win of ours, which is SNC Lavalin, who are a huge engineering business. I have an extension in Chrome, which I guess someone might find useful. It's called Built With. So it's just a Chrome extension. You can tap on that and it'll tell you what is installed on a site. And so that SNC Lavalin Careers website is a Workday website. But the wider answer is that Recite is designed and built to work on anything that outputs HTML, which is why at the beginning I wasn't just talking about websites or particular types of website. I was talking about anything that you access online. So any other platform, whether it's a learning management system or an intranet, Recite will in theory work on. The in theory bit just comes from what access and ability you have and the third party provides for you to be able to add the JavaScript which enables Recite to work. But it's a really straightforward process. If you can add Google Analytics, you can add Recite.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say from our experience that the process is really straightforward. And from a security perspective as well, obviously, is reading information from a page. It's also very secure as well, and passed all of our pretty stringent tests and went past our CTA Charlie, which says quite something. So, you guys have been great to work with. And Martin, I can only say thank you for all your time. And all your insight this morning. It's been really interesting.
I hope it was useful.
A bit of a dark art accessibility, but there are simple and really elegant solutions to making sure you're delivering an inclusive online candidate experience. And I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I think I saw someone comment that the testing tool would be interesting for them. So
yeah, for sure.
If I can get either an email address or something, I can send some info. Essentially, we're at beta testing with a couple of existing clients just to see if we're along the right lines with that. But I'm hopeful that we'll have something towards the end of the year.
Brilliant. We'll look forward to that. Thanks for everything, Martin.
No problem. I hope I lived up to the expert billing.
Oh, yeah, definitely, without doubt. And thank you, everybody, for joining this morning. We've got another session coming next week. And we are planning out and we'll be listing on the HoW Talent Sessions website a whole load more webinars to come. But next week's onboarding, pre-boarding, how to ace it. And I'm really pleased to be joined by my last week's upgrade, Claire. So we're gonna tag team, double act for next week, all about onboarding. I hope you'll come and see us then. And if you've got some value from this, do share the link with anybody and everybody in your network. More the merrier. Hope everybody has a great week. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, everybody. And see you this time next week.
Thanks a lot.